and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So, in this episode, I'll be discussing Disney's 1963 animated classic, and indeed their 18th classic release, The Sword in the Stone, as directed by Wolfgang Reitherman, and based on the novel of the same name by T.H. White, which is, of course, given that kind of magical Disney twist. So, I must admit, and I must say this right from the start, this has always been, and certainly from a very, very, very young age, one of my own very personal, beloved Disney classics. For me, it would probably be my first introduction into kind of that, that world of kind of magic and fantasy, and for some reason, it really did just strike a chord. As a bit of a kind of a geek, I think this one kind of spoke to me more than many of those kind of other early Disney classics, as it kind of had this kind of interesting kind of mix of magic and science. It was a fantasy, but I think it kind of opened my eyes to this kind of wondrous world where anything kind of could be possible, and indeed, as a good Disney should. The film sees us introduced to the legend of the Sword in the Stone. In that, at a dangerous time when England was without a king and without law and order, a miracle was sent to London in the above form of a sword, locked in a stone. The legend goes that whoever could pull the sword from the stone, not the stone from the sword, they would become the rightful king of England. Many tried over the years, but to no avail. That was until many years later, the sword, the legend is all but forgotten, to be fair. And this is kind of where we then join a young boy named Wart. Well, not Arthur, but we don't know that kind of time in the story. That was, I think, was supposed to be a bit of a surprise for the end. We kind of only know him by his nickname, Wart. As voiced by Rickie Sorensen, Richard Reitherman, and Robert Reitherman, is eager to kind of please his adoptive family and keen to learn the ways of the joust and other knightly pursuits. However, more often than not, he's treated like their skivvy, being the designated pot washer and undertaking any other chores the others would rather not do. In this respect, it's almost like a gender-reversed kind of version of Cinderella. A rags to riches story, moulded in a very, very similar vein, with quite a few kind of similar themes and elements throughout. One day, Arthur drops in on Merlin, as voiced by Karl Swenson, a powerful and all-seeing, well, almost all-seeing, an eccentric wizard, and his companion Archimedes, as voiced by Junius Matthews, a talking, ever-wise, and knowledgeable, often very cranky owl. Sensing great things in Wart's life for which he must be prepared, Merlin decides to take him under his wing and show him the wonders of the world and that brains can triumph over brawn through a series of amusing and kind of wondrous kind of adventures that they go on. The rest is, as they say, is history. Well, myth and legend at the very least. So, for me, whilst this Disney classic isn't perhaps one of the most kind of iconic that people kind of jump to when they think of a Disney classic, for me, the mixture of magic and adventure is just first class and makes this film all the more memorable. Now, I wouldn't perhaps say this is as punchy as some of the other Disney classics, even for the kind of era of the movie kind of which this one comes. As a humour, it can be quite dry at times, and some may perhaps go over some little ones' heads. On that, there is quite a bit for adults to enjoy, I think, and with quite a bit of this sarcastic wit, especially from Merlin and Archimedes. Our son, Oliver, he enjoyed the film for sure, and it certainly tickled his funny bone in places, especially in one scene with a wolf. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but it is hilarious and really did kind of remind me of sort of an early version of the squirrel. If it's a squirrel, I think it is. It's Scrap, from the Ice Age franchise. Very similar. However, I'm not sure whether or not he got all of the jokes or not in this one, as there are a lot that I kind of got a lot of, why did this happen, Daddy? Why did that happen, Daddy? What did that mean? Why did this say that? He was actually 6 when we watched the film the first time around, from where I'd kind of taken some of the points for this review. And so I do think, again, perhaps this is one for an older audience to kind of allow for kind of all of that kind of subtle comedy to be appreciated. Now, I have had kind of this review on the back burner for a while, so we did re-watch the movie. I always will do, so it's all nice and fresh in my mind, just to kind of refresh ourselves. And indeed, although he had no memory at all of watching the film previously, probably speaks volumes on his behalf, he did seem to kind of get it this time around a little bit more. As he is now 8 at the time of this review. So I do think that made all the difference, to be quite honest. The story is, like I said earlier, pretty much a gender-reversed version of Cinderella, with Wart having his very own fairy godfather, so to speak, in the guise of Merlin. It is quite quaint in this respect, but it's still a very charming and endearing tale nonetheless. And I think there's enough that's different in the end that it does its own thing. You know, it's not just a carbon copy. For me, I just think there's too much to the overall story to kind of be shunted into the film's fairly short runtime. You do kind of get the feeling that there's much more to it. And indeed, of course there is, you know. This is the story of Merlin and King Arthur and the legends of the Round Table, the knights and all that. But like many Disney's produced around this time, it doesn't quite get the ending right for me. It simply just quite abruptly ends with a narrative kind of filling us in on the detail that we've missed. Yeah, and quite a few do that from that era. It's a nice sweet tale for what it is, but perhaps a little bit too short and sweet given the scope of the story that it was trying to tell. The film does, however, have some quite catchy songs, even if they are not the most iconic or remembered, perhaps. Mostly sung by Merlin, in fact. And in one of the scenes, the setup is quite reminiscent of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, that piece from Fantasia. There was even a kind of a slight throwback as well to one of the brooms kind of being cut in half, similar to kind of Mickey's actions in that said segment, which I did kind of thought was a very subtle but quirky touch, acknowledging that they did indeed technically rip off the idea, you know. It's definitely a charming tale, not always brilliantly placed, but I do love its mix of mysticism, its magic and science all thrown in, with a darker but always kind of playful edge to some of the other Disney classics kind of released around that time. It's filmed with a much kind of darker colour palette, which does kind of give it a more gloomy feel at times, with beautiful animation, don't get me wrong, but sometimes which does kind of seem rather jagged and a bit rough around the edges. But for me, this all just adds to this kind of atmosphere of, you know, its medieval England setting. One of the standout elements of the movie is the fantastical battle of wits between Merlin and a witch, the magnificent, marvellous, mean Madam Mim, as voiced by, and I'll wait for a second, Martha Wentworth, who uses dark magic and wishes to thwart Merlin's plans for Wart. So, the battle, or indeed the wizard's duel, is more than the centrepiece of the movie for me. Madam Mim is a superb villain, tragically underused, however, having been kind of introduced far too late into the movie to make any real impact. But nonetheless, her segment is still absolutely awesome and full of trickery. So, overall for me, I found the movie to be a more sophisticated entry from Disney. It may not appeal to all ages or taste, but it is one of my own personal favourites. There's plenty of magic and good humour, with some fantastic animation, if perhaps a little bit rough. It's a charming tale that never fails to please. It perhaps kind of cuts a bit abrupt for me, feeling very much like just kind of a snippet of a larger whole, and indeed it is. There is much more to this story for sure. But the film kind of doesn't do itself justice in this respect. It kind of feeling rushed and with an abrupt ending as many of the Disney's produced during the same kind of era did. They just couldn't kind of seem to get it right at that point. However, it has a fantastic energy, some amazing characters, Merlin, Archimedes, Madam Mim, for sure, who more than make this movie what it is, full of magic, wonder, and just simply tons of nostalgia. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.